Hi, everyone. Welcome to so-called the part 3 of our Open-Fog security sessions. Yesterday morning, we joined the other folks giving an overview of Open-Fog architecture. And yesterday afternoon, I tried my best to present the position paper from the Open-Fog security working group on what are the challenges, approaches of fog security. Today, we want to start a dialogue. So I'm trying not to, we don't want to present a lot of slides. We're trying to have a dialogue with you about how fog security would be useful or should be performed in the era of IoT. So without further ado, let me say that we, as I said, we are going to have a dialogue fashion. The 5 colleagues of mine are the active contributing members of the security working group. They all have their expertise, and they will all take turn to address a separate issue in fog security with respect to IoT. Without further ado, I would say first of all,
do you want to talk about questions?
Okay, yeah, and after that, we hope to have at least half of the session to be open to the floor for dialogue, not only question and answer, but really for a dialogue. We know that we have a lot to learn from you also.
Maybe go just forward.
So without further ado, we will just say that we are going to do the first opening statements from each one of them. First, I will just give the time to Frank Michaud from Cisco. He is going to talk about the security function requirement of IoT and fog.
So hi, everybody. My name is Frank Michaud. I'm part of the Cisco Strategic Innovation Group team. I think you might have seen Matt Crunch, which is my boss in the previous session. So I would just like to start to introduce a bit the fog security and IoT security. So what is special, what is different to the security we are used to handle, to deal with today in the cloud and the enterprise security? So how is it special to what we know already? So what you have to think, I hope that you got through this yesterday and to this morning sessions, that the fog nodes might reside outside of data centers. They're going to reside in potentially hostile environment. We are talking about cars, smart cities. So we have seen yesterday the demo, the POC in Barcelona, where these fog nodes are residing in the cabinets in the streets. The IoT, the things as well, they're going to be everywhere around us. So how does that is special? So you have to think about, put yourself in the shoes of the security administrator. The guy is going to be in his data center, and he wants to maintain his trust, its security on this device, but he doesn't want to go, for example, in Barcelona with thousands of cabinets. He won't go every day to go on the fog nodes and check them out. He has to do that remotely, as well as the thousands of things he's going to have to manage and deal with security. So that's a total game changer. And that's where I'm using a bit the reference where the embedded world of security that maybe some of you know in terms of smart cards, where the protection are really strong, meet with the networking security, where in this networking security it's really hard to put walls around all of your systems, so you have to keep the wall open, but you invest a lot in detection and remediation. So in the fog and the IoT world, that's where these two worlds meet to each other. So we won't be able in a fog node to put walls around it. We have to keep the door open to make general computing, general communication services, but we need to be able to maintain security remotely. So that's a very important thing. So more or less, I will just break down a bit what kind of security function do we think, we foresee we need in a fog node. And we start just simple thing that the fog node will have to maintain communication, so implement secure communications. So what does that mean? So the fog node will have to implement some generic protocol like TLS, but it has as well to be able to secure the key, because the hacker will have potentially be able to take the box in his hand and to play with it when the security administrator will be remote. So you have to be able to secure that key good enough in order to avoid the guy to be able to steal it and to maintain this remote trust. Other example of security function you will need, secure storage. So it's more or less linked to what I just said. Remotely, you need to store sensitive data, and you need to store it against this physical attack on the box. And need security, that's a big game changer. Because you need to invest in technology, you need to invest on certain type of technology, and we'll see that a bit later more precisely, in order to protect this memory against physical attacks that are much more powerful than remote attacks. Next example, that in a fog system, maybe you have seen that, but we're going to have many actors operating on this fog node. So we need to be able to isolate these actors, isolate their memory, isolate their workspace, the processing space, their stack. So that's a very important thing, responsibility of the fog node security. The last one I would like to mention is the fact that, and that's very linked with what I just introduced, is that we need to maintain the integrity of this fog node remotely. We have seen that laptop computers are being infected, and it is really hard to get them back, to identify that. So we need to be able to remotely maintain the integrity of this fog node. And that's not an easy thing to do, but there are technologies already existing today that could help us in doing that. And typically, that's something that we're going to introduce later on, is the kind that we need to have root of trust, that where it's technology where you can root your trust and remotely ensure the integrity of your fog node.
Thank you, Frank. Since Frank has mentioned about the root of trust and mentioned a lot about the fog node security, I think it's a good time for us to go to that topic. And Don from ARM is really an expert on that. So without further ado, Don, please.
Yeah, excuse me, but I'm going to sit down for this because I have notes on my lap. I just returned from a long vacation, and I made notes to keep me on track. Yeah, 9 hours.
He's the lucky guy.
So I'm Don Banks. I'm a system architect at ARM. I was also involved in the original architectural description of FOG when I was at Cisco in the advanced technology group. And I've been continuing that while I'm at ARM. So I'm going to talk about two things, root of trust and trusted execution environments and how they relate. And the original concept of what we talked about that changed a bit after I was on vacation was we'd propose some questions and then answer them in order to guide the discussion from start to finish. So the first question that I proposed is, what is a root of trust? A definition of root of trust. One of the big issues is, if you read the material out there, there's a lot of different definitions, and some of them are very incomplete. Some of them are fairly complete, but they do have a lot of commonality. So some of the common points, common attributes of root of trust are that it's a set of co-located, and co-located is fairly important. Unconditionally trusted, i.e. you trust this software will work as advertised and will not fail in some unusual or terrible way during execution. And these trusted functions, which are code, execute in a hardware computing engine. The reason I've got the word hardware in there is because if you had a software computing engine that somehow emulated some set of services, the issue is, and we'll talk more about that later, everything below it, if that's not secure already, then this can't possibly be secure. You have to be, a root of trust is the way you can secure a platform or an execution engine from the start of execution through and up through the application stack. These co-located functions, trusted functions, may require data and or keys. If they do, those also have to be co-located on the same computing engine. Any secure service that's actually implemented on a device has to be verified. In other words, you have to be able to trust that function. You have to be able to verify that function is what it says it is. We'll talk more about how you might do that a little later. And it should record its verification somewhere so that later can be checked as to whether, in fact, the whole chain of trust, which we'll talk about, was in fact verified. Because if you have a hole in the chain of trust, then everything above that hole can't be trusted. One note is some of the material that's out there will often refer to a key as a root of trust. A key is not a root of trust. A key is some data that a root of trust may use to execute its function. But in and of itself, it's not a root of trust. And a key may be owned by one or more roots of trust. So the second question is, what is chain of trust and why is it important? So the chain of trust is simply the trusted elements that you're going to continue to load and execute from boot. Verify, first load and verify that trusted function. And then they continue that up through the entire boot process so that everything from the beginning of execution up through the chain has been verified and is trusted. And what that means is that the functions in and of themselves assume trust from their parent. The root of trust, there is a single root of trust. That's a root. From there can be many branches. There can be one single line of chain of trust. Chain of trust may, in fact, branch in multiple directions. But they all inherit from, okay. So I'm already getting the two fingers.
No, 2 minutes left. Okay.
It's a joke
So,
between us.
yes. So there's both a verified and a measured method to instantiate various components of a trusted execution engine. TEs, so what's the importance of a hardware root of trust or initial root of trust? So the initial root of trust is that part of the system that receives control at power on reset and executes the first load of code. That first load of code is typically, it's in immutable ROM. There are other implementations. It could be microcode on the chip. It could be various things, but that's typically immutable. That then,
Maybe you want to touch up how to go up the way to TEE.
Yeah.
This is the last.
so that then becomes the initial root of trust. That is rooted in hardware. That's referred to as a hardware root of trust. The reason for that is that if you don't start from the hardware up through some immutable code, which by its very nature can't be measured before it's executed, then there's the possibility of introducing foreign material that's not trusted into the chain of trust. So how does that relate to a TE? A TE is essentially built on one of the nodes that's a load of code in the boot process. So the trusted execution environment is established by one of those loads. There can be one or more trusted execution environments. Those are all validated. Then they use what are referred to as trusted applications, or TAs, to provide services, secure services. The rest of the system, they're isolated using hardware and software mechanisms from the normal execution part of that processor. They may be located on a separate processor or on the application processor. They're isolated either by the fact that they're separate on a completely different processor, or they're isolated by hardware mechanisms on the same processor. And they support a set of security services that the system then makes use of to allow, Frank referred to applications that are secure, to allow those applications to be secure and execute in a secure mode without actually containing the secure functions. The keys and the mechanisms by which those secure functions are offered are kept in a private set of resources that are divided either by being separate again or by a set of hardware functions that have a different execution mode.
Thanks a lot. Don. Actually, I know that you have some very elaborate notes. I wonder whether you would mind that we actually share some of them or make them public.
No, that was the intent. I just didn't get them here till today.
Yeah, sure. By the way, if you are interested, I know that the conference itself doesn't post all these notes on a public website. But if you want, please send requests to to me. I will later on post my email address there, and I will make sure that the slides will be delivered to you. Thank you.
If you want them from me, it's don.banks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe just directly
at
go
arm.com.
Yeah. don.banks@arm.com.
Right.
Right. don.banks. Yeah. Okay. Since Don ended with applications. You talk about concept of applications running in the DEEs. How about we just talk about applications? How can we use the fog node to run applications so that they can help the IoT to become more secure and more useful? Riaz, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Riaz Zolfonoon. I lead IoT security research at RSA Labs. I work for RSA. And back to point John raised, I guess the ultimate application in IoT is to make sure that we have a secure environment for connecting our devices, sensors, actuators, and trust the data that we collect from those devices. Be able to identify compromised devices when that happens. So in the 4 or 5 minutes that I have, I try to quickly go through some of the challenges that we face in achieving that goal and how the discussions we heard so far, which is about a secure platform in the fog environment, how we can actually utilize that to achieve that ultimate goal. So let's look at some of the challenges. You've heard probably in the previous talk since yesterday that some of these challenges, one is the massive scale of IoT, right? There are so many devices and actuators. Of course, when you hear the numbers from analysts in the reports, they are talking about the global space. It doesn't mean that necessarily me and you in our IoT deployment are going to have 22 billion devices, but still there are lots of devices. In one case that we are working with one of our own buildings, actually in Dell Technology Group, one building has about 1,300 sensors, and this is an automated building, instrumented building. So we are talking about large number of devices. So what we have heard so far about fog, what I propose here is that combination of the fog architecture, that distributed hierarchical model that fog provides for you, and analytics, which we heard about that in the business context yesterday, but now I'm talking about security analytics. The combination of these two elements can give us that environment that helps us to deal with the massive scale. If you think of having large number of devices, you need some structure to manage that environment. We get to that topic later through Bridget's talk. But if you think of that, then having ability to have a hierarchical structure allows you to divide your massive number of devices and have more elements that are involved, more compute and communication capabilities that fog provides for you to manage to deal with the scale. One other thing is that in addition to question of scale, you are dealing with brownfield in many situations. You go to instrument and environment, and you realize that the devices are already there. In fact, in many cases, these devices have had communication capabilities for decades. It's just that they were all in a siloed environment, and now they are suddenly connecting to this open, wild world of internet. So how do we deal with that? We cannot go in and just ask for changing the structure of the device, add more capabilities to it to secure it for internet connectivity. Very related to that, a separate challenge is the notion of constrained devices, which in that case, you don't have, even if the device is brand new, you may not have the full capability that you have in an IT device on these IoT sensors and actuators. So the one feature that comes handy here is that in most cases, IoT devices are single purpose. They are designed to perform certain function. So it's very predictable, actually, to detect when that device is acting anomalously. It is not like a laptop with a human being sitting in front of it and browsing the entire space of internet and getting infected and having all those issues. Therefore, now we talk about the analytics on top of the fog capabilities. So if you run your analytic engine on a fog node that is connecting to these devices, therefore you have the ability to monitor the device and detect anomalies and detect the compromise cases without actually touching the device, because this is actually one of the projects we are working on in RSA Labs, which through doing profiling of the device behavior while you are in a learning mode, you can actually define a profile of the normal behavior of the device, have a baseline, and when something bad happens, you can detect that and alert that. And where do you put your capabilities for analytics? If the device is not capable, you obviously put it on the fog. So that's why using a trusted platform, as my colleagues already explained to you how we build that, and putting analytics engine on top of that, now you have the ability to deal with the massive scale with devices that are either brownfield, you can't touch them, or they are constrained. And lastly, the fourth challenge that I was going to talk about, and I'm running out of time, is what Frank started with, which is, in many cases, these devices are deployed in an open field. We have customers that are in oil and gas. We have customers that have connected trains. And in all these scenarios, you cannot make assumptions that you make about the environment of an IT equipment. Therefore, by having a trusted platform that you use, whether it's onboard, depending on whether your endpoint is mobile or stationary, therefore, having a trusted platform that you run your security software on, which is, as we talked about, is the fog node, therefore, it allows you to have trust in the overall environment, because you monitor the device, and the device may not be that trustworthy on its own, but through this environment that you set up, by having a trusted platform underneath your security software, and on top of that, the discussion we heard yesterday about using virtualization to actually lift even the legacy environment and insert the security layer. These are all capabilities that we gain by having an architected environment that connects to the device. Not the device itself. Obviously, in ideal case, you have a device that is a generator or a jet engine and has all sorts of capabilities. But we are talking about the challenge for the case of constrained devices. And that allows us to use the fog again to deal with scenarios that the device is in a hostile environment. I'm done.
Thank you, Riaz. Actually, you mentioned a few points I think we should definitely like to follow up later. For example, how the constrained devices can be shepherded by the fog node. They can be dynamic. And I think in our paper, you also mentioned that our network itself can be disconnected temporarily, so we have to certain kind of autonomy.
And these were just four.
I think all these issues, I think we would like to kind of propagate here, and then later on discuss in open discussion. But definitely, all your things talk about are related to management. So I'd really like to have Bridget to talk about security management, not only for the fog, but also for the fog and IoT environment.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Bridget Martin. I'm a software engineering manager at Intel, not the one down the street. I'm in Arizona. So we've heard a lot of really interesting things today that all kind of dance around the concept of management, manageability, and how we're going to handle this massive amount of devices that are out there. And that's just what we're dealing with today when we're talking about IoT. We're going to get to an even more complex scenario when we start talking about fog and when we start to see this IoT kind of evolve into that kind of architecture. So as Frank mentioned, these devices need to be managed remotely. That's just inevitable. You're not going to have anybody in your IT department. If you have an IT department, go out to every single one of these devices, ensure that it hasn't been tampered with, and report back, check its networking. You're going to have hooks into these devices, both at a hardware layer as well as in the software manageability portion of this, to allow you to have secure and trusted access into those devices in order to ensure that they're operating as they're expected to. We also heard from Riaz that securing communications is critical for this. These devices are not siloed. They're not in their own little network. They're not isolated. They are not only talking back to your management system, but they're also talking to each other. Those communications between those devices need to be secure, and we need to be able to trust that data. And I think that's when we're going to start to see, as I view this, kind of this evolution from where we are today and things that we're seeing in IoT to actually a proper fog. And many of us, especially from OpenFog, have our definition of fog being able to really take advantage of that distributed set of resources that you have available to you. And so if we're really going to get to a point in our technological evolution where we have devices that are owned by me, owned by John, owned by Frank, by private citizens, by cities, and by corporations that are able to communicate with each other, as well as access and gain resources from the capabilities that they have in them, whether it's storage, networking, or their compute resources that they have available to them, or even their application resources, we really have to be able to establish this complete network of trust in a fog environment. And hardware root of trust is, of course, going to need to be a basis as we go through and we deploy that. But when we're talking about constrained devices and their ability to have some of those baked-in hardware root of trust capabilities, providing that next level of layer as a connection into the fog network that almost provides security as a service to some of those lower level devices is an option that we have. But I really think that fog gets interesting when we start to try to establish trust between devices that are not known between each other. It's really easy when you have one management system taking control of an entire set of devices, but when you have those devices need to talk to a set of devices that is managed by a completely other set of people or entities, that's when that interaction is risky and needs to be constantly monitored. And let's be realistic, that's not going to be people that are going to be doing that. I don't think we have enough people that can actually monitor all of these devices that we're going to have out there. And so we need to come up with a way that we can allow the devices to observe themselves, observe their network, their surroundings, and observe the actions of entities, whether it's devices or physical people or things around them, and establish or assign a reputation or a value of trust to those other entities, devices, and things within its environment. And that's really where I think that there's opportunity in future technologies that we're going to see that can help us get towards that. There's a lot of challenges, which I'm going to let my colleague talk about, Susanto, here in a minute, of technologies that exist today that I think can evolve and help get us to that area where we can establish some kind of rules-based in order to define trust and reputation between these devices that are not managed by one entity.
Thank you, Bridget.
Short time.
You're right on time. But of course, you mentioned about something you already create a lead for Susanto to cover the last subject of distributed ledger, because you talk about how to create trust between entities that's foreign or unfamiliar. But I also want to highlight one thing that you mentioned. You also mentioned about the importance of monitoring in addition to the management. But before we go to the monitoring and go to open discussion, how about we will have Susanto, who has presented yesterday also about distributed ledger, and see how distributed ledger can help us to do security management. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Susanto Irwan. I'm from the Sensify Security. A little bit about myself. I spent the past 16 years in cybersecurity, starting from protecting applications and then protecting websites, and then now focusing in IoT. The true value of fog is to enable data-driven autonomous operation, where machine can talk to each other, when you can create trust across machines. Riaz alluded earlier that the need of applications to do machine learning and analytics on the edge or on the fog. But some of the challenges that we have seen is that when an enterprise adopts a fog with multiple IoT devices, they are buying from so many different vendors, right? So then at that point, how do you create trust across multiple vendor devices? It's no longer every single device has whether it's a key, whether it's a certificate routed to a single authority, but now we have multiple authorities. In that model, how can we create trust? Whether that trust across different devices, across different fog nodes, how do you manage that as well and monitor that and create policy across different devices and fog nodes. I think that's when we look at distributed ledger, one of the key characteristics is that to create or provide trust in a peer-to-peer model without the need of central authority. One of the examples is that enabling cryptocurrencies to be able to trade or transact financial transactions across multiple parties without the need of a bank, right? So I think we can borrow some of these models that might be made available by the blockchain technologies to create trust across devices, across fog nodes in a way that doesn't require the need of central authority.
Thank you. You're even ahead of time. Okay, yeah, wonderful. But I have to say that we probably should. I pressed the thing too hard, so it went blank just like yesterday. We better use the time for the discussion. Now it's opening to the floor. Actually, before we came here, we write down 3 major questions, hopefully to stimulate the general discussion. So the first one, of course, is what are the differences if we now have all these IoT deployment? Maybe a lot of people here, you have all sorts of experience. We have all the IoT deployment. How does it affect our security issues, approach, and practice? Especially when we are preaching, saying the fog is the solution. Do you agree or disagree, or you have something more to elaborate? The second one is that we are thinking about doing this kind of collaborative fog computing and those things, coming from this angle. We are talking about a new era of having these distributed capabilities. How do you think that this will actually help you? Okay. The finally is, how do we do it? How do we create this so-called responsive, available, survivable, trusted IoT fog infrastructure? So all these are questions that we open, and they talk about trust, they talk about monitoring, they talk about a lot of other things. What do you feel? Yes. How about we just, okay, first of all, yeah, second and third, okay. You have to speak up because they run off mic, so, yeah.
I want to ask one question. When we're talking about all of these subjects, from trust root to how to handle all of this through security analytics and definitely distributed management, everything I agree with. My question is, unfortunately, when we're talking about security, we're thinking like we protect it, we detect it, we're monitoring, it's absolutely necessary. And what's after that? So after that, we're going to be hacked anyway, or in most cases. So what today we have for recovery or something like that? What fog computing can help with? What the difference between, because it's not my special computer at my very protected area and at my work or something like that. It's my home, something else, or maybe smart cars. So what's going to happen after something happens? So what do you recommend and how?
So I think
Yeah.
It's all
I
you.
can start. We have. Let's see that you have a fog platform that is secure, where you have a couple of root of trusts distributed in your system, and you can rely on them to detect and to take action based on that. And depending on the vertical, you can have different problematic. If you take an oil ring, you might detect that a robot is compromised, has been breached, has a malware, but this robot is essentially mission critical to the platform, and you cannot shut it down. So with a nice fog system, well deployed, you can start to control, to limit his damage, kind of isolate himself, keeping running because you cannot shut it down, but like blacklist all things around it and like isolate it. So these are the things you can start to be, you have like smart reactions you can take. And that's where my colleague mentioned this horizontal, we are talking about the east-west communication of the fog nodes. When you have several fog nodes talking to each other, they can start to take very smart decisions around that.
So the first thing I heard is damage management, okay? But I think, Bridget, Don, you also have some other suggestions. Don?
Go ahead.
So I think what Riaz mentioned, analytics, and the fact that you can trust certain subsystems within the platform and across the platforms. Therefore, once you've established communication, you can then detect anomalies, and by policy and by vertical, as Frank was talking, you can then decide how to address that anomaly. The anomaly, for instance, let's say it was a security service that was somehow compromised or was working incorrectly. The decision might be to kill that particular machine, not allow it on the network. But like Frank said, perhaps it's a robot. How do you quarantine that robot and stop it from, first of all, propagating any of the infection that it has, as well as limit its scope of damage?
Well,
Can I just comment?
sure, please.
Just to clarify my question. Oh, maybe I'm talking about simple things like my refrigerator attacking my computer, what I don't like. And I don't know who is responsible for that. So what you're saying, all of you, vendors should think about that at the very beginning. And I don't know how maybe government, maybe there's something else, should push this and to make it absolutely clear who is responsible, when, and how it should work. And not just functionalities, but about security. And personally, I don't see it right now.
So I think you can go ahead.
Actually,
Well, I would suggest one thing. We ought to be trying to be brief. I think there's a discussion going on, but that one thing.
Can I come?
Sure.
Just very briefly, what I've been seeing is that the operator is the key driver for the security requirements. So the operator will only buy equipments from vendor that they trust, right? After all, the IoT adoptions can be only driven if security is there. The CIO will not be buying equipments from an untrusted vendor. So by default, the operator will say, look, I'm gonna buy equipments from you if you can fill out this request for purchase, like a proposal exactly, line by line, the security functions. So then, if the vendors cannot fulfill it, for sure, they're not gonna be buying from that. And at the end, that is truly the key driver. And in addition, there are some certification body, for example, the Critical Infrastructure Protection is the NERC-CIP, mandates every utility company has to follow the following things, criteria to be able to adopt the next gen technology.
I know that you will have a quick response, but after that, then okay, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
So IoT is a green field for intelligence agencies. They have succeeded in blowing up centrifuges. Industrial espionage is going to be a gigantic problem. What can FOG standards do about the extra challenge that is posed by sophisticated intelligence agencies?
Guys?
So I will take an angle on this question by making a parallel with the European situation with the data privacy problematic, where the data privacy it's not the problem of the manufacturer, the technology company. It's not the problem of the operator. It's the problem of the citizen. And so the citizen eventually made laws to protect that. So. To come back then to your question, so I think does OpenFog Consortium will set up security standard to fight the CIA and all these agencies? I don't think we're going to go there. We're not going to collaborate with them. I mean, we're not going to implement specifically loopholes for them. That's not the goal. But we are
The CIA is not the only challenge. There are other big
Right. Right.
espionage players.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So right now we are more focusing. We are trying to determine there are like bigger problem. I would say that like trying to set up a system that is secure with the fact that we have multiple actors. We want to be autonomous. We want to be able to communicate to each other, and we want to secure the IoT. We help these things to be secured. So eventually we're gonna help to go against that problem. but it's not part of our like main use cases, I would say.
Maybe I would just, Riaz, please.
I was just going to
Let's
say
be
that
brief.
there are actually standards that are starting to evolve. And for example, in the case of IEC 62443, it defines 4 levels. It doesn't mean that the first level, which is for, let's say, accidental or casual attacks, that obviously doesn't meet the need for case you are considering. But if you look at the 4th level, is actually targeted exactly for sophisticated attacks with entities that have unlimited resources, right? So they may not say CIA, but we know what they're talking about. So the standards are starting to emerge, and as part of IoT-Fog or other organizations that are looking into designing these architectures, we obviously look at these initiatives, right? We don't create standards, but we look at the existing standards. And implementations would follow after that. So it's going to be a progressive process. It's not going to happen overnight. But the goal is to build the system so that it can adapt to the environment based on the level of security that you assign to it.
Maybe I would actually bring the question back to you. I wonder whether you have some thoughts. But before asking for your sharing, I would say that Fog actually created what security guys always want to say, defense in depth, because we put in more than one layer of intelligent agencies before the IoT device, or between the IoT device and their attackers. How do we use it?
Yeah. I think one of the most critical things is not having single points of failure.
Right.
You have to have multiple points, no one of which can be compromised. The other thing I think is going to be absolutely critical is generating, for each device, generating the public key, private key pair in a Faraday cage, doing all the encryption and decryption in the Faraday cage, and have the private key for that device never leave the Faraday cage.
In a sense, that's the CA and the traditional PKI model. But I wonder if in the fog computing era, we can actually let this Faraday cage be generalized to become a distributed environment, which collaboratively become the Faraday cage. I know that there are distributed, key generation technology, and they are also by maintaining not by the CA and the RA, but maintaining it by distributed ledger, we can make all these crucial information, including the credentials, more trustworthy.
Yeah, but that goes back to Bank's point that unless you secure the hardware of each device,
Yes.
you have nothing.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly the basic requirement of Fog node. I think that's one thing that we make it very clear.
So I think one of the
every
one of
Fog
the
node
issues,
have arbitrary
one of the
trust.
attributes of Fog architecture is that things are accessed in a hierarchical manner. And the thing above, and I use the word thing with a small t, not in the IoT sense, the thing above that can perform analytics and can quarantine things that it believes to be out of scope. Can it protect everything? I think that's going to be an ongoing process. The analytics, the act that is performed when something's detected, those will all be found and acted upon over time. Is somebody always going to be ahead of the game? Probably. There's going to be somebody who's going to find a way to break a 256-bit key, a 512-bit key, a 1024. There's always going to be somebody that's going to have enough time and resources to break something.
I see at least two hands. That's one. There's another one. Maybe there are others. So before I actually go on, now we only have 4 minutes left. Can I take the liberty of asking we can extend it for another 5 minutes? If people want to leave the room, then leave.
There's another talk after us.
What? Immediately after us? I thought that there's a coffee break right after us. No. No, okay. So
You just
we
wasted
only
a
have
minute, John.
like 4 minutes, please.
Yeah.
My point is segueing into what has been discussed. First of all, greetings to the honorable John Banks, with whom I had the privilege of working many years ago.
Yeah.
When I was hired in the city. So all of these wonderful topics that are discussed are going to have to be realizable,
Mm-hmm.
practical, deployable. I think we can let our imaginations go wild, and there's wonderful things that we can think about. So I want to sort of break it down to the concrete. There was mention that both the Intel team and the ARM team proposed some new security framework on devices. So the ARM PSA and Intel STO, I believe. I was wondering if the as well as other PKI essentials that are going to be necessary to implement fog security in a practical and cost-effective way are going to be facilitated through these offers from these device vendors. If not, then when? And are there proof of concept deployments, trials that we can take a look at, see how well these technologies in deployment are working? Because I think that's going to be what's going to really make the major change. If you can show that, yes, we can actually do these things practically, cost-effectively, scalably, then the tides will be over.
I think one of the issues there is that there are multiple parties involved in building and deploying a system. And so you mentioned ARM functionality and Intel functionality that is offered as a basis for providing security. There are many points in the chain before that product reaches use that people will introduce pieces and parts. They all, right. So everybody has to, well, so, but my point is everybody in that chain has to cooperate and implement the functionality all the way up. That's going to be a hard part.
That's
So the forum, I would say, would be the architecture framework document from OpenFog Consortium.
So the framework is here.
Should be showing, it's not the reference architecture that has been published, that's a refined version that is more detailed. That's going to show more or less the stack of a fog node, where you're going to see the different kind of layer of the security, because security block will talk to every layer, but there are going to be interfaces there being defined to talk specifically to render certain specific services to the different layers.
Are there any proof of concepts or trials of that document?
Quick comment. To answer your question, I think we have to think about detection and response separately. And response is a different set of technologies than detection and root of trust. To add to that point, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, about a year back or 1.5 years back, they put out a proposal for RADICS, RADICS, for rapid detection and isolation and this thing, right? So they said that advanced proposal stage asking for proposals. Now your question is, have we done something in the fog computing today? So we have put some thought into it, and we have some response capabilities that we can talk about at maybe also.
Just a small precision, a root of trust is a protection, it's not a detection device.
Right.
Yes, that's exactly my point. So root of trust only addresses the one half of it.
Yes. By the way, there's one last question, a hand raised here.
My question was follow-up first question. And Susanto, your comment was that the operators can be the enforcers for security.
Yeah.
I think my thought is that operators would be relying more on the system integrators. So I think the system integrators seem to be people who have to be in that case.
Yeah.
The operators. Just
I think I'm going to react to that, also answer your question as well. So based on my experience, I'm working with a very large utility company at the moment. The utility company has certain requirements because they want to have smart meters and fog to be able to communicate to each other and transact in real time in a peer-to-peer manner. Because in the smart meter networking, it's a mesh networking, kilobit per second connectivity on and off. It's not like a 24/7 type of data center connectivity to the cloud, right? So the need to do certain type of transaction requires a new paradigm for security. So related to also the previous question, I do have case study perhaps to share on how multiple vendors with a single prime system integrator working together to fulfill a very large requirements from the operators. So only when I see all this kind of like multiple vendors working together, that's when I truly see the secure deployments of both smart devices and also the fog node as well.
I'm afraid I have to cut it short and end this session here, but I also see one need, and I will propagate it to the management. I see the need of continuing these discussions. So I'd like to ask them to set up a email list and announce it before the end of the conference, saying that whether, how people can submit questions with regard to different panel, to the mailing list, and then we will try to respond to it, and hopefully that would generate, more fruitful discussion and would hopefully end up with action items. And I also invite all of you. You can see that we have a very exciting group here. If you are in this field, if you are interested, please join us. We are trying to do some cutting edge work and move this forward. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.